No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the myths of progress and culture in professional League of Legends. We're going to talk about talent over everything and why it's so important to focus on player talent, especially when you're looking at making bets on the professional leagues. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the futures bets that I've made, some of the sleepers that I like, and just a quick recap about some of the regions, because the season's right around the corner. All the major regions are starting up before the end of the month. I think 5 days from now, we're going to have some professional matches, so that's super exciting. But before we talk about that, I want to let you know that I've gotten rid of Patreon. I've gotten rid of I haven't gotten rid of the Discord community. The Discord community will still exist, but I'm also going to try to do more stuff on YouTube specifically with community building. So if you want to help support the channel, check out the memberships that are available, $5 a month. Help support the channel, helps me justify making these videos. We've gotten some good viewership over the past year. I hit 1,000 subscribers last year. I gave out DRX as a winner at Worlds last year. Overall, it's been a pretty good, couple of years from a betting perspective, DraftKings perspective. So let's, keep building the community. Maybe this season we can get to 2,000. That'd be pretty cool. So let's get into the bulk of the video. While I'm talking about this, my rankings are on the other screen. I made a video about my talent tier list, so if you want to see more information on that, you can always go check out the other video, but I will talk about some of the teams in this video. And this is going to be a little bit more scripted than usual, which is to say this video is going to be scripted because I normally kind of just go off the cuff, but there were some specific things that I wanted to talk about in this video before the season starts. So let's talk about the myth of progress and culture. So every week you hear analysts talk about players learning things on stage or progressing from the previous week, things about the meta that they've learned, things about other teams that they've learned, and a lot of it is just narrative building that's not true. In my opinion, it's a load of garbage. And that isn't to say that the players or coaches don't believe that it's happening, that they're like learning these small things or that they're gaining some kind of small edge by losing or something like that, but they're foolish to think that other teams aren't learning at a similar rate, or even more than them, especially if they're winning. And if they have a good read on the meta, it's easier to go from very good to great than it is to go from bad to good, in my opinion. So basically, teams will go on streaks whether or not they're learning from losses. And we always hear about the teams that are losing are learning things and getting better and improving, and sticking with the same roster is helpful in some way, when in reality, it's not a lot of the time, especially if the players aren't good enough. There is no reason to think a loss is more valuable than a win. They're both experiences. Some players may do better learning from a loss, but others do better learning from a win. Can it be the case that a loss is better than a win? Yes. But in my opinion, if I was running an organization, if I was the coach of one of these teams, or if I was a player on one of these teams, I would want to win, period. That's the way you justify getting paid, is by winning. When you take a look at a team like CLG, which is one of the teams that really kind of flies in the face of this, you see a team that brought back their entire roster. Now, I don't know if they tried to go out and find other players, if they tried to improve the talent on their team, but you can't tell me that their roster is going to, gel more over the offseason and become a more talented team or increase their ceiling when you have teams like FlyQuest, Evil Geniuses, Cloud9, Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, all either acquiring new players who are better or already having players who were better than them to begin with. Like, player talent doesn't swing wildly. For the most part, players fluctuate within like one level of how they come into the league. Are there players who, were horrible and then became great? I can't think of many. If you have someone in mind, feel free to leave it in the comments section. But if you're looking for players who are region winners or, difference makers at international tournaments, that's not going to happen between during the summer of year 4 or 5. it's going to happen early on. Most of these players you see come in and they have a huge impact pretty early, unless they're on a garbage team. But still, it's pretty easy to differentiate those players. And we're just the community in general is good at finding those kinds of players. For example, somebody like Zika was on a couple of fledgling teams who didn't do very well, but everyone was kind of understanding that he is an immense talent. When you get identified as somebody, when you get identified by someone like Coma, there's a good chance you're going to turn into something. And those are the types of shots that, the LCS and the Western teams in general need to be doing more often, because as we'll see with some of these teams in the East, they're much younger and they're constantly trying to find the next talented player, because you need that to be competitive on the international stage. So back to CLG. When you look at a team like CLG, they improved as time went on throughout the season, but they were still not a top team in North America when they were firing on all cylinders and had a good read on the meta. So even in their best case scenario, which in my opinion they kind of achieved last split by being different in the draft and having a roster that did kind of come together, they still weren't able to win the championship. Why should we believe that they have a chance at contending with a mediocre roster? Their players overall are just not very good. I think that Luger is a little bit interesting, but unless he takes a gigantic step forward, it's unlikely that, well, it's impossible for CLG to be very good unless Luger, somehow becomes the best AD carry in the region, which is unlikely because he is not the most talented AD carry in the region, especially with the addition of Prince. And this leads me to my next point, which is that as teams get more sophisticated as time goes on, I think we'll see talent over everything really become a mantra that some of these teams focus on. You see this in all traditional sports. There are some teams who do a good job of prioritizing talent, and other teams are focused on like culture building and stuff like that. Every once in a while, you'll have a team that is very good at culture building, like think the New England Patriots in football. Like that ended up working because they created a system that allows players to succeed. The problem is that in esports and specifically in League of Legends, it's difficult to have that kind of system set up because you don't know exactly what type of roster you need going into a given meta. Like if you had some long-term stability with some very talented players, somebody like Faker can go between different styles of play. He can be helpful in a meta where you need your mid laner to carry, and he can be helpful if you want to like focus on side lanes, or if Galio is very powerful, or if TF is very powerful. He can do both, and the flexibility is a talent in itself. So building a culture or a roster means nothing if you don't have talent. Look at how quickly the power dynamics have shifted in the LCS. FlyQuest bought a couple of players and they instantly become one of the best teams in the region. Does it mean they're going to win the LCS and go to Worlds and be competitive? No, but they accelerated their team's chances of winning by acquiring talented players. They weren't just bringing in, the same types of LCS names that we've seen before. Like, would you rather have Jensen or would you rather have Vikla, who is much younger and has shown flashes in the past, and also, brings Prince some comfortability to the team as well. If you look throughout the world, there have been tons of roster moves that make different teams interesting coming into the new year, but none of those teams took a step forward by keeping their roster together. The only team in my top 10 who has the same roster from last year is T1, and all of their players were already highly regarded as top talents in the world. And that's why it's so important to have good talent acquisition and talent identification, because you have a team like T1 who has Keria, Gumayusi, and Zeus. Those three players are super young and can probably be difference makers for a couple of years. Faker is much older now, but is still a very good player, and he's not as old as you probably think he is. And then Owner is good, but in my mind, he's not great. Do I think that he's going to hold back the team? Not necessarily. I think that they're good enough to kind of overcome that, but I don't think that Owner is the heart and soul of T1. I think it's Keria, and watching him lose the finals and like his reaction was kind of heartbreaking, but hopefully he comes out of that and is able to get back and win at some point, because he is one of the best players in the world right now. So like I said, the only team in my top 10 who has the same roster is T1, and all of their players were already highly regarded. If you missed my previous rankings video, you should check it out. but I will give a quick refresher here. So we are going into the last portion of the video, the futures and the sleepers in the LCS in North America, the most hilarious region in the world. We have EG taking a step backwards after a side grade in the top lane with Impact leaving and Someday coming in, and a downgrade, in my opinion, in the bot lane going from Danny to FBI. This allows FlyQuest to take the top spot with a very interesting roster that was built completely during the offseason. Impact and Spica are proven players. Impact was very good last year on Evil Geniuses. Spica struggled because his team was garbage, but he's an MVP caliber player when he's on a good team. And Isla looked good last year, filling in for Core JJ at different points. But the additions of Vikla and Prince instantly shook up the LCS, and FlyQuest should be considered the favorites going into the season. They are considered the favorites on the sports books, even if you're skeptical as like an LCS fan. At the end of the day, money talks, and the sports books realize that FlyQuest is, probably going to win the split. The percentage is they're about almost 30% chance of winning, according to the sports book, which is a pretty big number when you look across all the different regions. So I don't have any bets that I like in the LCS, but I do have a little bit of money on 100 Thieves because of the upside of Tenacity and Busio. It could be another Evil Geniuses situation where Danny and Jojo Pyun come in and have a big impact. The one difference I would say is that Inspired was kind of flying under the radar. A lot of people, I guess, didn't realize how good Inspired was coming over to the LCS, but right when they had Inspired and Danny, who were two players I already had a ton of respect for and high hopes for, like, the only question mark last year was Jojo Pyun, how good could he possibly be? And he ended up being a very good player. He's one of the best mid laners in the West. And he's one of the youngest mid laners throughout the world, which is kind of crazy. Like, he's just a very young player, which is a great thing to have on a team. But now we have Tenacity and Busio, who, if one of them or both of them can turn into some kind of playmaker, or if Tenacity can attract a lot of attention in the top lane while the rest of the team is able to build advantages elsewhere, it could be a very interesting style of play. Like, Bjergsen and Closer could have huge impact on both side lanes if they're willing to kind of sacrifice the mid lane. It is going to be somewhat meta dependent, and who knows what that's going to look like throughout the year. But it's at least interesting. Like, that's the worst case scenario for 100 Thieves, is that they have to try like risky strategies and it doesn't work for them, but at least it'll be entertaining to watch. I also put money on 100 Thieves because it's a hedge against them winning, because it would make me puke if Doublelift came back and instantly succeeded, because that just kind of feeds into the idea that some of these players can come back and still be good, when in reality we need to move on from a lot of these players and just get new blood into the LCS. Like, if Doublelift is good enough, then obviously fine, keep playing, but that's kind of a stopgap measure. It's not going to be a long-term solution at AD carry for 100 Thieves. Next up is the LEC, and even though Vitality made some interesting offseason moves, which made them the team that I ranked the highest in the LEC, it was XL who put together a squad with the upside that also offers good value on the sportsbooks. A lot of people are talking of Fnatic, but I think this is the year those players take a step backwards, and roster changes will be needed to be title contenders in the spring and summer. XL, on the other hand, which is why I do like XL, and I have placed money on XL, they completely revamped their roster by bringing in Odoamne, Xerxes, Vetio, and Targamas to supplement Patrick, who has quietly become one of the best ADCs in the West. Going into this season, I think he is clearly the most talented in the LEC. Vetio is also a high upside player who has been held back by poor teams and has still shown like some amazing performances. But for a while, he was really, kind of stuck with Misfits when they didn't have as good of rosters, but he would always kind of put together good performances. Odoamne had a good year last year. He's not great. He's not the difference maker in my mind, and neither is Xerxes. But Xerxes is much younger than people kind of realize, I think. He came in so young, and he's been struggling with, mediocre to bad teams. So the question is, is Xerxes actually good enough to be on a strong team? If Odoamne and Xerxes are able to play like a conservative style of League of Legends, while Vetio and Patrick kind of farm throughout the mid game and then get to those late game team fights, it could be a recipe for success. I think that Targamas, I don't think he's the best support in the region, but he is pretty aggressive, has an interesting champion pool, and is able to play some of those champions that give him playmaking upside. So I do like that. So ultimately, I want to support XL. That's kind of where I'm taking my stand in the LEC. I got them at plus 2,200, and I just bet them again, I think, at plus 2,500, I think. So, I'm happy to bet on them. Then let's go to the LCK. In the LCK, we have both Damwon and Hanwha bolstering their rosters with big names. Damwon, who just did a rebrand to Damwon plus Kia something, I don't know. They brought in Kana and Deft, where Kana is probably going to be the most improved player in the region, while Hanwha snatched Kingen and Zika from DRX. Speaking of DRX, how is that winning culture and world championship going to help them this season? It won't, because it doesn't have an impact. A world championship from the previous year will not carry over once the players are gone. When they leave, you start from square one. That's just how it is. The team with an outside chance of shaking things up in the LCK is Sandbox. Personally, I think that Birdall, Willer, and Closer are all very talented young players who haven't been on the upper echelon teams, which is really difficult to compete with in the LCK, because a lot of these teams who aren't, Genji, T1, Damwon Gaming, they don't have the luxury of having consistency, just because a lot of their players are kind of borderline, whereas the rest of them are world's caliber players, like some of the best in their roles. So when you find that talent kind of gravitating towards one team, it's difficult for the 4th, 5th, 6th place teams to be very competitive. But Sandbox, with their youth, has a chance of kind of exceeding expectations. They are one of the youngest rosters in the world with an average age around 19, and that is how you give yourself a chance to catch lightning in a bottle. I will say about Damwon, Kana is one of my favorite players in the world. He is one of the best top laners in the world. He did not fit with his previous team. Nongshim was not a good fit for him. His team was not strong enough. Ghost really held back that team somewhat significantly last year. I think that Kana, people will remember why Kana was so highly regarded on T1. Zeus is a very good top laner as well, but I think that the reason why they probably let Kana go is because he was going to command more money than Zeus was. So if it's an economic decision, I can see why they made that change. But I think everybody's going to remember why Kana was thought of as one of the best top laners in the world before his move last year. Let's end up in the LPL. Last but not least, we have JDG in the LPL, who I think are undoubtedly the best team in the world right now. After failing at Worlds, they had a massive upgrade in mid, going from Yagao to Knight, and at worst, they have a side grade in the bot lane, bringing in Ruler to replace Hope. Personally, I think that Ruler is much better than Hope. More consistent player, better in, not better, but is good in every single kind of meta that there is. I love JDG. I don't think that 369 is as good as a lot of other people do, but Kanavi is amazing. Missing is a very good support. So with Knight and Ruler, we are going to see this team at Worlds. If they didn't make it to Worlds, that would be shocking to me. I wish that I could bet on that on a sports book, but they don't really offer that in New Jersey, where I'm located. The team that I'm betting on with the longest odds in the LPL are BLG, who just lost to Weibo in the finals. I'm kind of upset that they don't have longer odds. I think that it's just a little surprising that their odds were roughly 9% implied odds to win. I would have assumed I could get it the 5, 6, 7% range. But I needed to have money on them just because that's the dark horse that I like for the LPL for this split. Bin, Shun, and Elk are three of the most underrated players in the region. Obviously, Bin had that great run at Worlds on Suning. Shun has been kind of wasted on Invictus Gaming for a little while now. And then Elk is another player who was on that World Elite roster in 2020 when they had Breathe, Beishong, and Missing, who all are very good players. Beishong, I'm kind of shocked that he's not on a roster right now, but those three players were always very good. Elk used to be named Jiao Meng. He was the AD carry for that team, and they had a run in the playoffs that was kind of very impressive. They were a very young team at that point. It's unfortunate they weren't able to hold all those players on the same roster, but I think that they're a very good team overall at this point. BLG, they just lost to Weibo in the finals. That was kind of an interesting series to watch. I watched the highlights. And, I think it shows that they can go toe-to-toe with a team like Weibo, who, again, they built their team with some upgrades during the offseason. Ultimately, I don't think that anyone's going to beat JDG. It might be like a close match in the finals or something like that, but JDG will most likely be the winning team from the LPL, but you basically get no money for betting on that. You'd have to bet it at plus 150 at this point. It might be 200. You might be able to find it at 200 or 250, but it's way too low for me to kind of justify tying up money for a couple months. But that's basically it. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.